everyone. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Kris. This is part 2 of Story of Vlad the Impaler. It was at 2544, I believe. I took it back a little bit just to kind of, and I've got, let me get my keyboard. Sorry. Okay, well, all right. Should have done all this before. Ugh. Got black licorice, I think, for Laffy Taffy. Laffy Taffy. Saltwater Taffy. Wow, what's wrong with me? Okay, video.
Get from one location to another. A vexed voivode who seemed to do everything to the extreme, Dracula was not stingy with his rewards for those who would do good. This mindset of his may account for his seemingly back-and-forth approach to relations with the city of Brashov throughout the same time period.
Okay, new part.
Vlad was not an enemy of Brashov, or Transylvania as a whole by any means. In fact, relations between Dracula and the people of the Transylvanian cities were very positive, and he sought refuge in Brashov, Zhigishara, and other neighboring towns throughout his life. At one point, the Wallachian even describes his Brashovian allies as honest men, brothers, friends, and sincere neighbors in a letter to the mayor. Nonetheless, no one was exempt from Vlad's strong morals and policies. One of the first signs of growing strain between Dracula and the German Saxon cities of Transylvania came after he chose the side of Michael Szilágyi and Hunyadis over Habsburg, making them fast political enemies. When the citizens of Bystriza rebelled against the Szilágyis in response to what they considered to be fiscal abuses by the family, Vlad was quick to back his allies and help Michael Szilágyi assail the town, finding the leaders of the revolt and burning their homes to the ground. In reaction to this, the German cities across Transylvania became angry with Dracula, spreading a claim that he had renewed his vassalship with Sultan Mehmed shortly after becoming voivode. This outraged Vlad, as he considered the German Saxons, especially those of Brashov, to be his friends. Furthering the newfound hostilities, the mayor of Brashov decided to shift his support to Vlad's new dynasty rival, the brother of Vladislav II, Dan III. Conveniently for the German Saxons, who were staunch supporters of the Habsburgs, Dan III was a friend of the family, as well as an enemy of Vlad Dracula. As if this betrayal wasn't enough, the city of Sibiu also decided to remove their support from the current voivode, and instead backed a new pretender, Vlad the Monk, half-brother of Dracula himself. Vlad initially attempted to resolve these new issues by sending diplomats to both Brashov and Sibiu, but neither city chose to respond to the request for diplomacy. Now furious following these scandalous actions by the Transylvanian city leaders, he decided to retaliate by bringing heavy sanctions down on the German Saxon merchants of the region. Vlad ended the initial agreement he'd signed back in 1456 and instead began to give favor to the Wallachian merchants, causing considerable financial ramifications for the German Saxons over time. This alone led to more conflict, as the Transylvanian merchants tried to avoid the new policy demands, prompting repeated raids by Dracula and his troops over the next couple of years. In 1458, Vlad himself led a small troop of cavalrymen without warning into Transylvania, where the supporters of both Dan III and Vlad the Monk resided, burning their villages and killing the inhabitants who endorsed his rivals. Vlad then had arrested and impaled all the German Saxon merchants who refused to obey his new rules of trade. He also executed 41 young Saxons who had supposedly been sent to Wallachia to learn the Romanian language, citing that he believed them to actually be spies, which is abundantly likely. Finally, due to a softening of political tension in Hungary, diplomatic negotiations between Vlad, the new king of Hungary, and representatives of Brasov occurred. An agreement was finally reached on November 23, 1458, with the Brashovians agreeing to hand over Dan III and his supporting boyars, and Vlad was to restore the terms of his original commercial policy with the German Saxon merchants. The city of Brasov was also required to pay 10,000 florins in war damages to Michael Silagi. While everyone, especially Dracula, seemed dissatisfied with the stipulations, it seems that no one actually followed through, as Vlad was forced to perform a raid near the city of Brasov once again, this time in an attempt to capture his exiled rival. He set fire to crops and homes and impaled men, women, and children. But regardless of all of his efforts, Vlad was unable to seize Dan III, who had already gone into hiding. Shortly afterward, though, in 1460, Dan and his Brashovian supporters waged an attack on Wallachia. But were briskly defeated. Dan was captured during the strike. Vlad had a priest read the mass for the dead before forcing Dan to dig his own grave, finally ending the ordeal by cutting off his rival's head. The rest of Dan's supporters, who had also been captured, were then impaled. The city of Brasov
I mean, you gotta say something. The guy loves to impale people, doesn't he?
attempted to defuse the situation by this time, but Dracula declined to come to any agreements until Vlad the monk was no longer a political threat. Still trying to handle the situation himself, Dracula then attacks the town of Amlash, aiming to eradicate supporters of his half-brother. Despite the fact that, according to Michael B. Hume, roughly 30,000 German Saxons were killed during the assault, a peace treaty was signed on October 1st, 1460 between the Brashovian City Council and Dracula representatives. Finally, Vlad could focus his foreign attention on the growing issue of the Turks, especially considering his choice in 1459 to cease payment of the yearly tribute to Sultan Mehmed. Though Dracula ruled a notably small principality with an equally small army, his patriotism and dedication to his faith led him to the conclusion that the Turks must be dealt with. After all, by virtue of his father, Vlad was a proud member of the Order of the Dragon, a Christian group of nobles who swore to defend the cross from its enemies. The name Dracul, meaning the dragon, was given to Vlad II after he swore his own oath to the order. Dracula, thus translating simply to son of the dragon, was a name happily adopted by the highly religious Vlad III. Due to this deeply ingrained Christian honor, it comes as no surprise that when Pope Pius II called for yet another crusade, beginning his appeal in September of 1459, Dracula was one of the only European supporters to promptly show interest in the cause. Though no crusade happened at the time, the Wallachian prince stayed true to his stance against the Ottomans. By the fall of 1460, Vlad sent a letter to the elders of Brasov stating that he detained Turkish envoys that had come to Wallachia to request peaceful passage through the principality, allowing them to again raid and wreak havoc on the Transylvanian cities. Dracula, referring to himself as a Brashovian brother and faithful friend, informs them that he had no wish to betray the city or his Catholic allies. Based on multiple narratives, it is likely that these Turkish envoys were the victims of the famous nailing of the turbans, in which Vlad responded to the men's refusal to remove their turbans by having nails hammered into their skulls, saying that he wished to assist the Turks in strengthening their customs. The combination of these acts on the part of Dracula, united with his continued refusal from 1459 onwards to pay the now overdue yearly tribute, even impaling Ottoman military commanders, is likely what caused a swift escalation in tensions. In November of 1461, Vlad sent a letter to Sultan Mehmed claiming that the war with the German Saxons had drained his treasury, but that he intended to pay his debts and even add gifts of his own, along with many children and horses for the Sultan. He also advised his former peer that he could not leave his capital to come to Constantinople, claiming that if he did so, his political opponents would take advantage and seize his territory.
If he left, they would basically hold him hostage, though, right? I mean, he's not dumb.
Mehmed initially believed Dracula to be sincere and sent an embassy to Targovishte to meet with the Wallachian prince. The Sultan's opinion quickly changed after letters written by Vlad to King Matthias Corvinus were intercepted, their contents proving that Vlad had formed a military alliance with the Hungarian king and was likely being dishonest with the Turks. Consequently, Mehmed devised a plan to kidnap Dracula and bring him to Constantinople. Vlad, once again given warning of such a plot, decided to still attend the newly scheduled meeting, but brought along cavalrymen who would trail him and his courtiers. In a later letter to the Hungarian king,
At least when I click skip ad, it's not skipping to the next ad. I don't know what that was about.
Vlad tells of how he eventually arrested the men who intended to capture him near the Giorgio fortress, which Dracula and his men then destroyed. Upon reaching the gates, Vlad disguised himself and gave orders in perfect Turkish to the station commander, convincing him to allow them in, permitting an easy ambush. Briskly following the Giorgio attack, while Sultan Mehmed was still occupied in Asia Minor, Dracula continued his bombardment of the Turks during the winter of 1461 to 1462. He bragged of his achievements to King Matthias in a letter, telling the Hungarian ruler that, "I have killed men and women, old and young, who lived at Obluchica and Novoselo up to Rahova, which is located near Kilia. We killed 23,884 Turks and Bulgars, without counting those whom we burned in homes, or whose heads were not caught by our soldiers. Thus, your highness must know that I have broken the peace with him." Him, obviously referring to Sultan Mehmed. Angered by Vlad's sudden aggression, the Sultan sent an army to destroy the Wallachian port of Braila, although his Grand Vizier leading the mission decided to also organize a full-scale assault on Wallachian territories and villages. Dracula, having been notified of this, intercepted the Ottoman troops as they attempted to leave Braila. Only some 8,000 Turks are thought to have survived this ambush as the Wallachians took down an impressive amount of the Ottoman soldiers.
Black licorice again. And it's not black. They've disguised the color to make it look like it's grape. Sons of bitches.
Finally, Mehmed decided it was time to refocus his attention on the threat of the Wallachian prince, taking the route of a full-out invasion. Back in Wallachia, in a decent position to handle the oncoming strike from the Turks, Vlad was being praised left and right by his fellow Christian leaders. Even Pope Pius II was in awe of Dracula's ingenious military talents and commitment to fight against the Ottomans. Vlad took this opportunity to warn his European neighbors of the new Turkish threat, reminding them that any attack on Wallachia would surely make its way to the surrounding territories. He hoped to re-inspire the idea of a crusade, knowing that he alone could not stop the Ottoman invasion altogether. Despite a previous military alliance with the King of Hungary, Vlad received little support from Matthias, who was more concerned about his political affairs with the Holy Roman Emperor. Regardless of the struggle to rally Allied military aid, Dracula was extremely successful at energizing up the enthusiasm within his own 30,000-strong army. His mindset on the concept of the upcoming war can easily be understood by his own words, in which he told to his troops, "It would be better that those who think of death should not follow me." A leader of true pride and resolve, Vlad inspired his people to take the same mentality. As the war continued to accelerate, the lack of equal numbers and weaponry on the Wallachian side led to Dracula and his army enacting a variety of methods to weaken their opponent. Some of these methods included germ warfare, scorched earth, strategic retreat, and guerrilla tactics.
No.
Eventually, Vlad came up with a plan to kill the Sultan himself, executing the strike which is now referred to as the night attack at Targoviste. An account from one of Dracula's veterans that was recorded by Nicolo Modrusa, a papal legate, recalls, at nightfall, Dracula penetrated into the Turkish camp with parts of his troops, all the way up to the fortifications, and during the entire night he sped up like lightning in every direction and caused great slaughter. So much so that had the other commander to whom he had entrusted his remaining forces been equally brave, or had the Turks not fully obeyed the repeated orders from the Sultan not to abandon their garrisons, the Wallachian undoubtedly would have gained the greatest and most brilliant victory. Dracula carried out an incredible massacre, without losing many men in such a major encounter, though many were wounded. He abandoned the enemy camp before daybreak and returned to the same mountain from which he had come. No one dared pursue him, since he had caused such a terror and turmoil. I learned by questioning those who had participated in this battle that the Sultan lost all confidence in the situation. During that night, the Sultan abandoned the camp and fled in a shameful manner, and he would have continued this way had he not been reprimanded by his friends and brought back almost against his will. Undeterred completely by the current decrease in morale, the Turks were ready only a few days later to finally attack the capital of Targoviste. Ready as they may have been, neither the Sultan nor his men expected what they came to find. Covering roughly a mile of land in a semicircle formation were the remains of around 20,000 impaled Turks mounted on their stakes. This scene is now referred to as the Forest of the Impaled.
Did you know that there's a simple combination of natural ingredients that will help you poop out pounds of old rotten waste in your colon within just a matter of days, and without the side effects?
Impaled. At this point, the entirety of the Ottoman forces seemed to acknowledge that it was time to retreat. Sultan Mehmed is said to have commented that he could not take land away from a man who does such marvelous things, and surely a man who had accomplished this is worthy of greater things. Around this time, Vlad's cousin
So all those impaled bodies basically scared the shit out of that guy.
and trusted ally up to this event, Stephen the Great, committed.
And I can't say he's wrong. I don't know what my reaction would be if I saw 23,000 impaled soldiers. I'd probably think, hey guys, let's just go home. What do you think?
A remarkable betrayal and attacks the fortress of Kilia with Turkish assistance. The fortress was now occupied by both the Wallachians and the Hungarians, of which Stephen was at odds with their king, Matthias. Thankfully for the Wallachian voivode, the Moldavians were defeated, and Stephen was permanently injured in the altercation. Though both Stephen and Mehmed had to return to their homes after humiliating failures at the hands of Dracula, the Turks had not fully given up. Instead, the mission of taking control over Wallachia was now left under the responsibility of Radu the Handsome, the younger brother of Vlad, who had chosen to stay with the Ottomans in his youth. Using kind and fair diplomacy, Radu was able to win over the support and loyalty of a large portion of the Wallachian boyars and even some of his brother's army. Inevitably, Vlad was then forced to retreat from his capital, no longer being recognized as prince of the land. In the last known military confrontation between the brothers' forces, it is said that Vlad's mistress and mother of his eldest son, later to be known as Menia the Evil, threw herself out of the Poenari fortress and into the river, choosing to be eaten by the fish of the Argesh rather than be taken captive by the Turks.
What kind of fish are there? Is it like... piranha? Or is it just a reference to she would rather drown and be eaten by fish than to surrender? Must be that.
Dracula's new plan was to now meet with King Matthias of Hungary and once again ask for support in defending his territory and sovereignty. A long period of waiting, followed by weeks of negotiation with the Hungarian king, led to a disappointing outcome for Vlad that was to only get worse. Originally, Matthias decided to simply make peace with the Turks and support the princely position of Radu. This clearly would have angered Vlad, who had thought Matthias to be an ally, but he likely never anticipated that this would lead to his arrest at the hands of the King of Hungary. In a truly heinous plot, tricking Dracula into believing he was supported in retaking the throne, Matthias sent Vlad off along with a reasonable contingent. Upon arriving at Königstein Castle, under the orders of the king, the Slovak mercenary who led the contingent force arrested Vlad and brought him back up to Matthias to be held as prisoner. In order to defend such sudden and inexplicable actions towards someone who'd been deemed a Christian hero, the Hungarians attempted to use forged letters of false submission to the Turks with Vlad's signature on them. Vlad was betrayed, as these letters were wildly out of character and included terminology, attitude, and poor language that would never be attributed to Vlad. Historians have discovered that the likely author was a man by the name of Johann Rudul of Brasov. While some believed these letters to be true, many European powers were suspicious and accused the Hungarian king of acting in opposition to general opinion. While Dracula was not released for some 12 years from Hungarian custody, it is believed that he spent most of his time essentially on house arrest within Matthias's palaces, instead of serving as a true prisoner. Although, there are two separate accounts recalling interesting behaviors exhibited by Vlad while actually jailed. It is said that he would catch mice or have birds brought to him so that he could impale them on small pieces of wood he found. Nonetheless, while not being kept in a cell, Dracula was oftentimes invited into the presence of King Matthias and his important guests. The Hungarian began to realize that Vlad's reputation left visitors both in awe and in fear of the man. And knowing this, when a delegation from Sultan Mehmed came to meet him, Matthias made sure that Dracula was with him at the time of the engagement. In essence, Vlad was being used as a pawn or unspoken threat to anyone who dared test the king. This strange situation of captivity carried on until after the death of Radu the Handsome in 1475, at which King Matthias made a proposal to Vlad, offering to free him so he could regain the Wallachian throne if he would convert to Catholicism. Of course, Dracula agreed to the terms and was now able to marry a relative of Matthias, his new wife being Ilona Szilágyi, daughter of his late ally Michael Szilágyi. Vlad was now free to move to a residence in Pest, and the rest of Europe seemed incredibly pleased at the news of his release. Vlad lost no time getting back to his usual morally driven self, which he clearly demonstrated in an incident that occurred in his new home and the birthplace of his second and possibly third son. The stories claim that when a criminal ran into Dracula's courtyard to hide from the police, Vlad intercepted the pursuing officers and cut the head off one who was holding the criminal and consequently let him go free. When words got back to Matthias in Hungary, he sent one of his men to go and ask Vlad why he would commit such a crime. The Wallachian's response, which earned a laugh from Matthias when it was brought back to him, said, "I did not commit any crime. It is the police official who committed suicide. Anyone will perish in this way should be, like a thief, invade the house of a great ruler such as myself. If this man had come to me first and had explained the situation to me, and if the criminal had been found in my home, I myself would have delivered the criminal over to him." Though Vlad was personally ready to regain his throne, before he could do so, there was work to be done to ensure that he would be successful. First, he and his cousin Stephen of Moldavia managed to settle their feud. Stephen even went as far as to ask King Matthias, his former enemy, to help replace Basarab Laiota, who had taken the throne following Radu's death, with Vlad Dracula as the Prince of Wallachia. After participating in the crusade under the Hungarian king in Bosnia, Matthias finally granted granted Vlad his support for the seizure of the Wallachian throne in 1476. Leading a campaign spearheaded by himself, Stephen the Great, Stephen Bathory, and Vuk Brankovic, Dracula was finally able to regain his place as Voivode of Wallachia. Following his own reporting of the victory and capture of the capital on November 8, 1476, Vlad met with Stephen of Moldavia, at which point both men swore eternal allegiance to each other and the Crusader cause. This marks the start of his third and final reign as Prince of Wallachia. Now around the age of 45, Vlad was in a precarious position once the local support of his newfound allies had been withdrawn. There were too many schisms within Wallachian political society, and of course, the Turkish enemy was not happy about his return to power. Dracula was fully aware of the dangers he may have been in, leading to his ultimate resolution that he would not bring his wife or sons with him to Targovishte out of fear for their safety. Stephen of Moldavia, concerned for his cousin as well, left 200 bodyguards with Vlad, likely not having much trust in the fickle Wallachian boyar class. Just as the cousins had seen such a doom coming, after a matter of weeks on the Wallachian throne, Vlad met his end during a skirmish against Basarab Laiota and a Turkish contingent that was twice the number of Dracula's forces. There are varying versions of the exact method in which Vlad was killed, but the most accurate rendition is that he was killed by a hired Turkish assassin who had disguised himself as a servant of Dracula until the moment of his death.
Did the Impaler get impaled?
Of Stephen's bodyguards, who fought valiantly with Vlad in his final moments, only a mere 10 survived to tell the tale. After a lifetime of perseverance, valor, and controversy, Vlad's the Impaler of Wallachia at last was no more. A politician and warlord, builder of fortresses and churches, and a man of severely contrasting generosity and brutality, Vlad's the Third Dracula is remembered to some as a cruel tyrant, and to others as a national hero.
But an awesome
Dictator
mustache.
or champion, the three-time Prince of Wallachia left a legacy worth remembering.
Yeah. That was pretty interesting. Turn this off. That's pretty good. Obviously, the only real thing I know about Vlad the Impaler was that they based Dracula off of him, and he impaled people, and he had a fortress that I think is still around today. I think that was mentioned in the first one. It's pretty good though. He was young when he died. I mean, a lot of them were young back then. But interesting. Huh. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and end this here. I'm trying to find the Frederick the Great videos. This will probably be out Wednesday morning, and I'm trying to find the Frederick the Great. But I'm going to also do some more Inca Empire kind of videos too. But, I'm trying to find that next series, and Frederick the Great I think would be one, but whatever. Let's just babble. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. Have a good day, have a good night.